Okay, students, I hope this lecture finds everybody well. Uh, Today is July the 13th, 2020, the year of the pandemic. Um, for future classes that want to know when this was recorded, and this is a synopsis of chapters 1, 2, and 3. I may not make it all the way, but Lecture 1, Unit 1, Lectures 1, 2, and 3. Students are to read in OpenStack up to the Enlightenment, but not the Enlightenment, okay? That means that you will read up to the Enlightenment, but not the Enlightenment. We'll cover the Enlightenment in the next chapter. Okay, let's get started. Again, these are my views, not the views of Tarrant County College South Campus. They're my views. Again, if you like the lecture, make sure that you like on the like button, and if you have constructive criticism, please do so. Now we're going to start. I don't start. A lot of professors start at Plymouth Rock, and I don't start in 1620. I actually go a little further back than Plymouth Rock, and I actually go to the Ice Bridge, which is pretty much like 20,000 years before Common Era, where people from Eurasia or crossed the Bering Strait into Alaska and then made their way down the Pacific coast. Now, some of these people went across to the Mississippi River drainage and came down the Mississippi, and then, of course, went across through the Tennessee River and the Ohio River and populated those areas. For the most part, Native Americans made their way all the way down as far south as Peru, and they went into, of course, the Florida, the more temperate climates where you have more water. We do not have the existence of a plains culture until the introduction of the horse in the 1550s with the Spaniards, okay? So, one of the things that does happen, and one of the reasons that we know that this happened, is that when they decide to cross the Bering Strait, they kind of stay in that area for about 1,000 years, believe it or not, and they live there uh, uh, in that area of the Bering Strait, and they have a genetic marker that only people that come from there have. I have that genetic marker, okay, as a matter of fact. Most Mexicans or Mexican Americans or Mexicans have that genetic marker. Most Native Americans have that genetic marker. Europeans don't have that genetic marker because they didn't come in that way. They came in through the Atlantic, okay? Now, these individuals were called Paleo-Indians, all right? And paleo means old, and they are pretty much a hunter-gatherer society, okay? It's a rough life. They don't live very long. Their life expectancy is the average is 35 years of age. Usually, they would die from an injury that they inflicted upon themselves or a wild animal. And right around 5,500 years before Common Era and 200 years Common Era, we begin to see a new way of life with the decline of the glaciated period or the ice age. You begin to see permanent settlement, the farming of vegetables, small game, and fish, and then finer stone tools were developed. You also see the domestication of the dog. Now, remember, Native Americans on North America did not have any beasts of burden. The only animals that they domesticate are turkeys and dogs, and the Mexicans domesticated a barkless dog, okay? It was also a hairless dog, and they're very popular now. The stone tools that they developed were things like the Clovis point. They didn't have a bow and arrow just yet. They had something called an atlatl, which is a spear thrower. Look it up. Atlatl. Atlatl. And the Clovis point. It's a revolutionary point that had an unintended blood groove that becomes very, very important in Native American society. Now, one of the things that happens at this time is the domestication of wild plants, okay, like tomatoes, teosinte, which eventually becomes corn. You have squash, you have beans. Corn, squash, and beans becomes the three sisters or the trinity of sustenance, okay? With these three things and a small amount of meat or protein, Native Americans are able to survive and live a lot longer. Another thing that we kind of suspect that may have happened as this warming trend starts is a lot of these animals die. Why? Because it got really hot really fast. And in addition to that, the other thing that happens here is that a lot of us believe that because they have better stone tools and then have better ways of hunting, that they actually overkilled these animals. And because some of these larger mammals had a longer gestation period, they didn't have time to catch up. Gestation period on a woolly mammoth is almost 2 years. So that in itself would be the fact that these animals could not catch up with themselves or keep their populations abreast. Okay. Now, what you'll begin to see is, again, you will see the cultivation of certain foods, and this is going to create, for example, uh, corn is Zia maize or mother corn is going to create a population explosion. They get the corn, they dry it. Later on, they can grind it. Now women can have corn or have foodstuffs all the time. That means that birth rates are going to increase. Um, Breastfeeding is going to be allowed to happen longer as long as women are breastfeeding at this time. They're not menstruating, so they won't get pregnant. So that's going to create population increases, and that's why corn is so incredibly dear to Native Americans. Okay, now they supplement that diet with small game and fish, more protein-packed things, and they become a more stable sedentary society. Okay, and because their numbers were never really that great, they don't put a big dent. They don't leave a big footprint on the environment. All right. Now, while all this is going on in the Americas, I mean, we have Europeans that are obviously restless. They are exploring, they are moving around in China, they're moving around. The Vikings under Leif Erikson are doing some exploration themselves. Zhang He, the great Chinese admiral, is also taking some voyages via Pacific, where we suspect that he may have seen the North American mainland. We suspect that the Vikings saw the eastern North American mainland, but they didn't stay. And of course, we're going to have Columbus. I don't spend a lot of time on Columbus. Why? Because everybody knows about Columbus already, and I believe that maybe, we've kind of plowed that over quite a bit. In addition to that, we're going to have some reverse exploration. Of course, we're going to have Marco Polo in Europe. We're going to have the Crusades. We're also going to have Vasco da Gama that, goes past the Cape Horn and goes to India. Magellan, whose crew circumnavigates the globe. Even though Magellan is killed in the Philippines, his crew still circumnavigates the globe. And they didn't discover that the world was round. There was people that knew that the world was round. They just didn't say that it was, okay? And then, of course, you're going to begin to have the unification of nation states. As people begin to travel, as people begin to get out and experience more diversity, then you begin to have these feudal kingdoms begin to join with each other and become nation states. And in order for a nation state to be powerful enough to explore, you've got to have a unified country. You have the good maritime, you have to have a good navy, and you have to have money, and you can't be spending money on wars, because if you're spending money on wars, then you're not going to be able to spend them on exploration. And if you spend money on exploration, then you can go to other countries, bring raw materials, and then use those to boost the prestige and the wealth of your country. That's going to be called mercantilism, okay? And that's very important. The first kings that unify that I believe are important are Ferdinand and Isabella. And they unify the kingdom of Castile and Aragon. And in 14, they get married in 1469, and in 1492 they expel the Moors from Spain. Now, while the expulsion of the Moors and the discovery of the New World for the Spanish was considered monumental in 1492, I do believe that 1492 also ushered in the decline of the Spanish Empire because they also expelled the Jews. Jews were either killed, they were forced to convert, or they were forced to leave. Um, when the Moors were there, or Muslims were in Spain, they had something called convivencia. That means that they would allow others' religions to live as long as they paid their taxes and practiced their religion behind closed doors. Okay. In France, we're going to see unification under Louis the 11th, and in England, we're going to see unification under Henry Tudor in the 1480s with the War of the Roses, okay? And that is going to bring us into the age of exploration. Now, the first country to undertake exploration was the Portuguese, and they did it under the tutelage of Prince Henry the Navigator. He's the one that invested and encouraged the Portuguese to, and the Portuguese were the first to go to the Bight of Africa, which is the west coast of Africa. It looks like they bit a chunk of it out. And in addition to that, they lay claims to the Azores, the Canary, and the Madeira Islands. And if you look at the geographic location of those islands, they can use those islands to springboard and eventually make it under the Cape of Africa, which is important. It's very hard for them to make it through the Cape of Africa because when it's a good time to sail on northern Africa, it's not a good time to sail in southern Africa. So when it's winter in the north, it's summer in the south, and when it's winter in the south, it's um, uh, winter in the north. Or I guess I got those around, but you know what I'm saying. Africa is a lot like South America, where people that live in the northern part have different temperate climates than people in the south, and those that live closer to the equator, they have a more constant season. So if you look at these bands of settlement that go across like this, you'll see that these people have more in common, that they live in a latitude other than longitude. People that live in an area in a longitude, the ones in the north are not going to be able to adapt to the environment of those in the south, and vice versa. Okay. And it is the Portuguese that start the institution of slavery. They actually go to Africa, and under the Songhay Empire, they buy slaves from the Songhay, and they trade them for rum, they trade them for guns, they trade them for steel, those things. So eventually, there's going to be a great demand for labor. The African people, the African Songhay, are going to introduce the Portuguese to sugar and sugar cane, and very labor intensive. It's going to get taken back to the Azores where it's going to be cultivated, and they're going to need more slaves in order to um, cultivate more sugar. So sugar, not cotton, that actually starts slavery. Okay. Now, one of the things that you all have to keep in mind is that this is the transatlantic world. This is all new contact. There's a clash of cultures. Each culture is going to see Native Americans differently. The Spanish, the English, the French. The French are going to see them as the Bon Sauvage. The Spanish are going to see them as children of God. They believe that everything that's living was created by God, and that they have the opportunity to give their life to God. And if they don't, they'll put them to the sword. Now, the English, on the other hand, didn't feel that way. The English, under no circumstances did they feel as they had to extend anything to uh, them. They felt that they were in their way, they were an impediment. So they were pretty swift with them as the way that they dealt with them. So out of this exchange, there's going to be two events or two terms that come out. One is the Columbian Exchange that was coined by Alfred Crosby, former professor at UT Austin, and the other one is going to be triangular trade. Those are two completely different things, okay? The Columbian Exchange is the exchange of biological and foodstuff material from the old world to the new world. And you will have to know some of these items. Corn, squash, and beans, tomatoes, tobacco. These are things that go from the new world to the old world. The old world has, horse, cattle, sheep, pigs, slaves, all of the diseases. Most all the diseases come from the old world. The only disease that we argue that comes from the new world to the old world is syphilis. But we don't even know that for sure, okay? For all we know, it could have been passed from animal to human on board a ship. So we're not completely sure of that. Now, this exchange of goods is going to lead to triangular trade, the trade of raw materials for taking them to Europe to create, finished materials, and then take some of those finished materials, sell them back to the colonies, or trade them for slaves, is going to create triangular trade. And you see the triangle from the colonies to Europe to Africa, or from Africa to Brazil to the colonies and back. It really just goes in different ways. Now, what's going to happen here, people, is that with all this going on, we're going to have some religious fervor take place. You're going to have more food on the table. You're going to have the Gutenberg Bible that's going to be published. Later on, King James II is going to print a Bible in English or Old English and not in Latin anymore. So more food on the table, people living longer. They're not have to be so close to God, and you're going to see the rise of the Protestant Reformation. Okay, and the Protestant Reformation is really going to create some issues. Okay, and we're going to have exploration and settlement that's going to come off of the Protestant Reformation. So I want you to know the Protestant Reformation, and pretty much what happens here is that you have Martin Luther that points out the 95 things that are wrong with the Catholic Church. And in doing so, he then starts a schism or a problem with the Catholic Church. Okay, and the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church go their separate ways. All right, you can look up the reasons: indulgences, praying to saints, that kind of stuff. The Protestants believe in direct communication. Okay, now this is going to create a problem with Henry VIII. Okay, when Henry VIII wants to divorce Catherine of Aragon, and the Pope tells him, no, you can't, because Catherine of Aragon is the niece of the most powerful man in the world, Philip II, the King of Spain. So Henry gets pissed off and he starts the Anglican Church. He divorces Catherine of Aragon, sends her to a castle and marries Anne Boleyn. We all know what happens to Anne Boleyn. She's going to get her head cut off eventually. Oh, my cord got caught there. And then her sister's going to become the queen. And you're going to have every time that you have a king or a queen move around, you're going to see it in the colonies. And we're going to talk about that in the next lecture. Now, as far as these things that go on, I want you to cover lightly the Spanish explorers and see some of the things that they did. I want you to know the main French explorers that are in your notes, and I want you to know the Dutch. And in the next lecture, which is lecture 3, I'm going to cover colonial experiments in 17th century America, and that'll pretty much cover everything, okay? Now, you all take care. Make sure you keep up with your reading, and I will talk to you later. Remember to hit the like button or to subscribe. It really helps more people to see this. Wear your masks and stay sage, okay? Take care, have a great day, and be kind to each other.